Welcome to Around the Empire. This is a fully independent podcast. Lend your support at patreon.com/aroundtheempire, rockfin.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Co-hosting today is Kelley Lane, and our guest is Ray McGovern. We talk about Ray's recent article calling for military generals to be held accountable this time for this 20-year March of Folly called the war in Afghanistan. And if they are not held accountable, there will be still worse to come. In a bonus episode, we talk about Biden's battle with the media, the intelligence complex, and the whole MICIMATT, an acronym that Ray has coined for the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank complex. The same complex that worked so hard to put him into the White House. Ray McGovern is a retired CIA analyst who served as chief of the Soviet Foreign Policy Branch and the preparer briefer of the President's Daily Brief. Prior to that, he served as an infantry intelligence officer in the 1960s. He's the co-founder of the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, VIPS. He's an activist, a prolific writer, and a frequent guest on various media outlets. We recorded this on August 23rd, 2021. Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm Joanne Leon, co-host Kelley Lane here today, and our guest today is Ray McGovern. We're both longtime readers, listeners of Ray, and we're really excited to have you on, Ray, today. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show.
You're most welcome.
So today we're going to talk about an article that I personally was very, very glad to see. It's on antiwar.com. I'll link it in the show notes for everybody. And the title of it, and mind you, this was sort of early in the game here. This was published on August 14th. So that means he wrote it even before that. The title is Hold the Generals Accountable This Time. First of all, thank you, Ray, for writing this article. And actually, I don't think it needs an intro. Just tell us what your thoughts are on this.
Well, the generals are pretty much responsible for forcing Obama, since he had a very weak spine, into continuing the war, indeed into surging the war, even though the general that knew most about it told him that the surge would not work. So the general's responsibility goes way back. But more recently, when we talk about the suddenness of the rapidity with which things fell, then that's the blame game that's going on here. Wasn't anybody warned? Well, there are two facets that I could discuss now. And one is, when you're around for a while, as I have been, when you were on active duty when Vietnam was raging, and I was with the CIA at the time, you learn lessons, okay? Now, the supreme genre of intelligence analysis, which the director of Central Intelligence in those days, now the director of National Intelligence, actually signs on the cover, is called the National Intelligence Estimate, okay? This is the coordinated all 12 intelligence agencies at the time. I'm talking 1967, okay? The war is raging in Vietnam. My colleagues who were assessing the enemy's strength, Sam Adams first and foremost, I was at it from the Soviet perspective. What were the Soviets trying to do in Vietnam, if anything? And the answer was not much, okay? So the question was, well, why is this war dragging on? How many communists under arms are there in South Vietnam? Now, Sam Adams, my colleague, and a couple others filled the conference room tables full of sources, POW reports, defector reports, photography, intercepts, and so forth, and concluded that there were between 500 and 600,000 communists under arms in South Vietnam. Now, the people in Saigon under General William Westmoreland was saying, no, there couldn't be more than 299,000 enemy in South Vietnam. Okay. Now, Sam went out to Saigon and found out that those figures were deliberately obfuscated, deliberately fooled around with. And so he was right, came back, persuaded everybody in Washington that he was right, everyone except the Army, of course, because of Westmoreland. And an estimate was done, really good estimate, which said they have 500 to 600,000 troops in South Vietnam. And that was already in the fall of 1967. We gave it to the director. His name was Richard Helms at the time, and he rejected it. Why did he reject it? He told us, well, look, folks, my primary job is to protect the CIA. And there's no way I could protect the agency by getting involved in a pissing match with the US Army at war. Boom, into the circular file. Now, what happened? 3 months later, February 1968, the Tet Offensive, where every city, province, town, hamlet in South Vietnam, including the US Embassy, were attacked by how many Viet Cong? Well, it looked like about 600,000, right? Okay. Now, why do I mention that? I mention that because, well, probably people know the old adage, the first casualty of war is truth. Okay. Now, another first casualty of war is intelligence analysis that is subjective, that is independent, that is not concocted by the US Army at war. Okay, that's the lesson from Vietnam. I told you a very concrete, accurate quote from Director Helms. So what happened this time? Well, there are intermediate things. What happened in 2006 when we were losing in Iraq, and Cheney and Bush said, my God, we could lose a war before we leave office. And so they hired Bobby Gates and Petraeus to do a surge. Okay. Now, what was a surge for? Well, ostensibly, it was to help the Iraqis. Yeah. It killed 1,000 US troops, but it just allowed Bush and Cheney to exit to on horseback to the west without having lost a war. Okay, now, was there an intelligence estimate then? No. Why? Well, Bobby Gates, who knew the territory, he had been head of the CIA, and Petraeus said, no, we'll do this by ourselves. We have to fire the generals who know which end is up, put in new generals, and we'll win this, okay? 2 years later, 2009, the same thing happened. I wrote an article 12 and a half years ago, which said, welcome to Vietnam, Mr. President. And I was Obama, of course, and he was cajoled or forced, or he had no backbone. He couldn't face them down. And before you knew it, we had 100,000 people in Afghanistan. So that's the background. So what happened this time? What do we know about CENTCOM? CENTCOM being the Central Command, which is the command that rules the roost in that part of the world. Well, we know that when the CENTCOM commander was a fellow named Lloyd Austin, there were great complaints by intelligence analysts that the intelligence was being fixed around the policy. They would write objective intelligence, and at higher levels, it would be made more rosy and made very different, okay? There were 50 intelligence analysts that protested. An IG report whitewashed the whole thing. Who was in charge? It was General Austin, now the Secretary of Defense. So there's a history of massaging intelligence. And, Austin is not really, well, let's say, when he was in charge of CENTCOM, there was also this disaster where Congress appropriated and we spent $500 Now that's $500,000 to train and give weapons to good guys in Syria, the so-called moderate rebels. Okay, so Austin comes back just before he retires, and Congress says, "Well, okay, how did we do? How many good rebels? How many moderate rebels are still in Syria fighting the bad guys?" And he looked up and he said, 4 or 5. And Congress said, 4 or 5? My God. Yeah. And he said, 4 or 5. And I thought at the time, well, at least he's being candid, but the tone was 4 or 5. What are you going to do about it? In other words, here's Congress having appropriated $500,000 for 4 or 5 people still in Syria. And General Austin knew quite well Congress was not going to do a damn thing about it. They keep appropriating this money because they can't afford to lose a war. So the week later, he quit. I mean, he retired. And then all of a sudden, we know that he joined Raytheon at the board of directors, and he became a millionaire like that. So 4 years later, he's taken out of retirement. So that, well, he's made the Secretary of Defense. So those are the kinds of people running our policy. The Marines are even worse. General, what's his name, McKenzie, who heads up CENTCOM now. I have the book on him and his predecessors, Mattis and James Jones, the whole coterie of Marine generals who, the charitable explanation that my friends give me for these very senior Marine generals is that they're dumb as a doornail. Now, I have a little trouble believing that, for example, McKenzie could have been so dumb to manage the strategic withdrawal in the way that he did, or mismanage it, I guess is a better word. There's a chance that they wanted to give Biden a bloody nose. They wanted to show the world that Biden's, from hunger, that the Biden doesn't know which end is up. And maybe they'd reintroduce U.S. troops in Afghanistan. This is a guess on my part, but there's hardly any other way to explain what happened. And very briefly, I'll finish here with 14 April. President says, all troops out of Afghanistan by 9/11 this year. Okay. May, 14 June, 2 months later, Mattis says publicly, we're going to withdraw all air support. We're going to close down Bagram Air Force. And the only reason we would reintroduce air support would be if we found out that our homeland or the homeland of our allies were directly threatened. Okay. Whoa. 2 weeks later, in the middle of the night, Bagram Air Force Base, the biggest Air Force base in that part of the world, is closed down without even telling the local Afghan commander. They're out of there. Now, what's my point? My point is, I'm a Taliban person, right? Or I work for the Afghan government. And I know that the only reason that it prevented the Taliban from taking over so far was close air support. Oh, so now it's withdrawn on the 14th, or it's announced withdrawn 14th of June. And now the 2nd of July, they closed down the airfield. Hello, what am I going to do here? I mean, looks like just a matter of time. Maybe those overtures that the Taliban had been making toward me as an Afghan government official or military, maybe I ought to make that deal, and they do. And that's why hardly a shot was fired. The Taliban comes rushing in, and on the 15th of August, you'll see what the result was. So now, was that predictable? Of course it was predictable. Am I saying that McKenzie is dumb as a doornail? Well, most of my friends say, yeah, that's it. I have problems with that. But in any case, if the charitable explanation is correct, namely dumb as a doornail, he still needs to be held to account. And so do his uppers including Austin, and of course, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, what's his name? Milley, because he is given the same sobriquet by my friends, dumb as a doornail.
Yeah, I'm going to also link the Welcome to Vietnam, Mr. President article that you wrote. 20, when was that, Ray?
Well, it was 2009. It was the 28th of March. The President Obama had stood up on the 24th of March, surrounded by the Petraeuses and their ilk, and a ostensible civilian named Bruce Rydell, then at Brookings. He gave a civilian patina, a civilian veneer to the proceedings, although, as I tried to emphasize before, there was no national intelligence estimate. Petraeus and the rest of them had sort of elbowed out the intelligence community. They were allowed to be what we used to call strap hangers along the end of at the end of the conference room. And even Obama said, I have this here. Yeah. He says, this careful review of policy was made by military commanders and diplomats, the Afghan and Pakistani governments, NATO, and other international groups. Oh, that's really interesting. Careful policy review, no mention of intelligence, because there was no intelligent input. Petraeus and Bobby Gates at the time were able to elbow things out. So bottom line here is that if you're going to blame intelligence, well, intelligence is, among truth, the first casualty of war. And maybe there were people in the CIA, I suspect there were, who knew what would happen if close air support was denied. Did they speak up? Well, I imagine they tried to. Did their betters go to the military and the president say, this is a fool's errand? We're never going to succeed here. Well, maybe they did. Were they listened to? No. Probably the head of the CIA said the same thing that Dick Helms said. We don't get involved in that pissing contest with the U.S. Army at war, right? And even if they did get involved in that contest, the end result, the U.S. Army and the military and the generals would prevail. Now, why do we go on like this? Well, those same generals, in the view of my good friends who know more about this than I do, who have personal contacts with these generals who went to West Point with them, for God's sake, say that they're dumb. They're dumb as a doornail, all right? They're not going to be held accountable because Biden would lose too much face. Now, that's the same situation that Obama faced. They don't stand up to the generals. They don't stand up to the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media complex, and you could see that at play over the last couple of weeks.
Well, I guess there's one question that always comes into my mind, especially watching this media coverage, is, we hear a lot about troop withdrawals, of course, now all focused on Kabul, but there were also a lot of, I'll say CIA, I'm not sure if there were other intelligence organizations involved in these operations, but there were a lot of CIA operations in Afghanistan as well. And then they had their own death squads or whatever. They had their own sort of special operations that they worked with, Afghan, I guess, special operations. And I don't know if it was about a month ago or 2 months ago, there was a rash of articles in the media, it's not one from the New York Times in particular, saying, oh my God, the CIA is saying that they cannot find another place to locate their bases. The stand countries are not agreeing to it. And this is going to be a real problem. And of course, I can understand why, for some reasons, not having eyes on the ground is a dangerous thing while you're withdrawing troops and things like that. But they had other operations that seemed to be their own. What do you think about that?
Well, the CIA is very powerful, and they are almost a match for the military. But if special operations is running the whole deal, that is military special operations, the CIA will be a companion, but they won't be in charge. CIA is supposed to tell the Army, Air Force, what's going on. And a lot of CIA analysts, I'm told, have been reduced to targeteers. This target might be this fellow we know had lunch with a suspected terrorist in Beirut 2 weeks ago. So he may be a suspected terrorist. Put him on a list for killing by drones. That's the kind of stuff that the CIA analysts have been doing. So it's all coordinated. And the military is really in charge. Special operations now has grown from hundreds to tens of thousands. And so there's this own dynamic. Now, when they're deprived of Bagram Air Force Base, when they're deprived of the kind of entree that they used to have to the palace in Kabul, well, of course, they're going to suffer. But part of their duties was simply to pay off people like Ghani, pay off all these corrupt people with the millions and billions of dollars that we sunk into that morass. And they'll find some other place to spend their the largesse with which Congress blesses the CIA and its covert action program.
Well, in your article, you mentioned a book, is it Barbara Tuchman, about March of Folly, from Troy to Vietnam. And you talk about how it seemed surprising that Obama didn't know the history in Vietnam of what happened with these surges. But when you look at all of these wars, it's history repeating itself. And why is it that, is it just to mask it from the general public? Anybody paying close enough attention can see we make these same mistakes over and over again. And it's just like hidden, right? So do you want to talk any more about her book and why you brought that up in the article?
Mm-hmm. Well, the bottom line is filthy lucre. In other words, what I call the MICIMATT, the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank complex, which has grown like Topsy since 60 years ago when I talked about the military industrial complex. Okay. That's been ruling the roost. Okay. Now, look at the recent article done by John Schwartz in The Intercept. He points out that if you invested $1,000 or $10,000 in Raytheon, Lockheed, and those major defense contractors in October of 2001, now that would have it'd be worth $100,000. Okay, so even though the market went up, the appreciation of these stocks was 58% higher than what the market achieved. So this is very tangible evidence that people who invested in the military industrial complex made out like bandits. Now, with respect to Obama, I could see as early as June 2007. No, the re-election was 2008. It was June 2008 that Obama had been sucked into the what they call a deep state, this military industrial complex. How did I know that? Well, it had come out that the military, that the NSA was intercepting all our conversations, all our emails, and and the mega corporations, the telecom corporations were going to be held accountable. And Senator Obama says, yes, we need to hold these people accountable for infringing on our Fourth Amendment rights. We're going to do that. Then John Brennan joins his campaign. And all of a sudden, Obama says, I changed my mind. We're not going to hold these people accountable. It's much too important that these people cooperate with us. So now that was late June of 2008. I smelled a rat right there. He was bending to the deep state, defending it, and why? Well, I think presidents and upcoming presidents can be intimidated by being warned about various possibilities, like what happened to John F. Kennedy. And this is no exaggeration. That's what they do. Besides that, of course, they have all kinds of information on you, and you know that they have all kinds of information on you because you read that in the New York Times. So Obama was corrupted at that point, and he didn't face down the military for the next 8 years.
Right. Well, as the general public, I think, becomes maybe hopefully more aware of what the real reasons are that we go to war, like you said, financial incentives or whatever, it's does it not become harder to hide those real reasons from people? It's always we're spreading democracy, but
well, Kelley, that's a really good question, and the answer is one that was foreseen by General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower. He said, "Look, this immense power since World War II is either sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex." Well, we know now that it's sought, right? It's very much sought. Okay. But then he said, the only check on this, the only check is an informed citizenry. And that, my friends, is what we don't have now. That's why I say, when I say military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, as in all caps, the media is the fulcrum. That's the cornerstone of all this. It doesn't work unless you deceive most Americans into thinking that being defended, rather than all this money is being wasted, more than half of their tax money, discretionary income of the government, is being wasted. $2 trillion for Afghanistan, $500,000 for good, moderate terrorists in Syria. I mean, they get away with it. Well, they get away with it because of the media. The media doesn't do its job. That's why I'm so pleased to be on a program like this. And that's why I try my best to spread the truth around.
We're very glad that you do, Ray. I'm not just, fluffing you up by saying I was really glad to see this article, because I'm kind of torn on where to go next with this, because I'm really curious about the battle that I see going on in the media right now. But I'm also really curious about your thoughts on withdrawing from Bagram the way it did, and just sort of the logistics of the military. I mean, that's supposed to be the thing that our military is really excellent at, is moving stuff around, moving people and things around. And that is exactly what they seem to be failing at. So I'm curious about McKenzie.
right. I believe, as you mentioned, an informed public. And I think, when most Americans do not get this education, obviously, in our history classes in school, you don't. And so I think that's why podcasts like Joanne's are so important. But once you start really digging, you see it's the same story over and over again. And I love how you talked in this article and you brought it back to what happened in Vietnam. And could Obama have possibly been, in the Welcome to Vietnam, Mr. President, could he have possibly been that in the dark about it? And as you said before, though, there are probably other reasons that were driving that. So that's really what I wanted to ask more about, what you think about how do we change that so if the public is more aware?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's no substitute for getting the facts out, and Americans need to know where to look for the facts. Now, Obama surely knew the warnings. When you mentioned Jessica Matthews, Tuchman Matthews, she was the head of Carnegie. Okay, Carnegie is a big deal. Okay, and she was an excellent analyst. And she, being the daughter of the historian Barbara Tuchman, who wrote that wonderful book, March of Folly, From Troy to Vietnam, she knew which end was up. And she wrote very courageously at the same time I was writing my memo to Dear Mr. President, welcome to Vietnam. She said, look, the only way to stop this thing is to withdraw troops. That's the catalyst for all the insurgency, so to speak. You have to draw down your troops, Mr. President. Now, did no one show that to Obama? Well, I hope somebody showed it to him, but he was not his own person. Clearly, he was afraid. And there's one vignette that I'll pass along here. Now, it's not like the other things I've been saying that I can vouch for firsthand or from firsthand analysis. This comes secondhand, but it's entirely credible. During this time, he's having dinner with a well-heeled supporter group, about 12 of them. And they're grousing about how he was, really not being very progressive, either domestically or foreign policies, doing crazy things. And finally, in the middle of dessert, he stood up and said, look, don't you remember what happened to Dr. King? Now, again, I do not believe that's made up. It comes from a very, very reliable primary source, but he was relying on somebody else that I can't vouch for. But that is the mentality. That is the mentality. You can't mess with the deep state. And particularly if the deep state is feeding the media all its stories. And that's what's going on now. So you're right to point to sensible people like Jessica Tuchman Matthews, who pointed out in early 2009, look, you have to withdraw troops if you want to end an insurgency. Terrorism is not, I used to use this analogy, to defeat terrorism, it's the same as defeating malaria. So, malaria, you trace back the mosquitoes to the swamp where they breed, and then you get 200,000 sharpshooters around the swamp, and you try to shoot the mosquitoes as they leave the swamp, right? Wrong. What do? You drain the swamp. What's the swamp? The swamp is the legitimate grievances that so many Muslims have against our support for Israel and for what we do ourselves to the Islamic peoples. So unless you drain that swamp, it's as feckless an exercise as trying to shoot the mosquitoes emerging from the swamp to cause malaria. And we've defeated malaria, but we're not going to defeat insurgency unless we drain the swamp.
Well, on that note, I think we have a notion, though, that when we go in to a country, that is, or I should say, maybe some people on the left have this notion now that we are the cause. You see what happens. Young children in Iraq and Afghanistan, they don't see American. They see people bombed, and they don't see us as good, right? But there are other factors there that those the Taliban they can cause problems without us coming in, and it's kind of like, where do we draw that line of like interfering? I mean, obviously interference isn't helping, but do we completely step out? Where's that balance, I guess?
It's a good question, Kelley. People are saying, Al Qaeda is going to come back into Afghanistan now. That's what my diplomat friends call male bovine excrement. It's BS, okay? There was a brief time where the Taliban used some Al Qaeda operatives because the Taliban did not control all of Afghanistan at the time. Now, as far as 9/11 is concerned, and the anniversary is almost hard upon us, right? Well, sure, there were a couple of training camps in Afghanistan. I mean, but they could have been anywhere. They could have been sub-Sahara Africa. They could have been anywhere to do that, okay? The 9/11 was planned in Hamburg and in fancy chalets in Spain and in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. That's where the thing was planned. The fact that they had some training areas in Afghanistan was sort of incidental. And the best expert on this, Paul Pillar, who's a good friend of mine, points out that, you can get that kind of training area anywhere in the world. It's not specific to Afghanistan. And indeed, the Afghans offered us Osama bin Laden on a platter if we could prove that he was responsible for 9/11. We never did try to prove it to the Taliban. And so they let him escape. What does that tell you? That tells me that there were bigger equities involved. We wanted to do this war, and then we wanted to divert attention from this war to the war in Iraq. And it's just convenient to have Osama bin Laden at large, because then we had this bugaboo that we had to keep militating against. And part of that, of course, was this faux war in Afghanistan, where those training bases had already been decimated. And why we stayed there? Well, as I said before, people invested in these Raytheons and Lockheeds made a tenfold increase in their stock prices.
On that note, Ray, probably time to roll into a bonus question. And you talked about, early in the interview, talked about what happened to the good intelligence that when it got to the top level with with the CIA director Helms. So this battle that I see going on in the media right now between what seems to be the intelligence, quote unquote, community, whatever that really is, and Biden, there's definitely a back and forth going on, like, we gave you the intelligence, Biden saying, no, you didn't give you gave me a whole bunch of scenarios. You didn't warn me about this. I'd really love to hear your insights on what's really going on there, if you would. The answer to the bonus question is in the extra bonus segment for patrons. You can get access to all bonus content by subscribing at Rockfin or Patreon, plus other perks like patron live streams, Zoom calls, and access to our Discord channel where we can talk among ourselves. So that's my pitch, and I hope that some of you will join us. And now I'll continue with the interview wrap-up. Well, Ray, thank you so much for coming on the show, giving us your insights. I really appreciate it. And if you would, tell people how to continue to follow your work, how to get the latest on what you've written, what you're saying, and this kind of thing, and how to support you.
Well, my youngest son is my webmeister, my webmaster, and it's raymcgovern.com. Not very hard to remember. He's made it really easily searchable, okay? And he keeps telling me if I don't mention it in interviews like this, well, he's not going to do it anymore. And he also says, tell him this, Dad. If you don't get it, you don't get it. Okay. Take that for what it's worth. You can find everything, pretty much everything I do or say, my lectures, my interviews, as well as my articles on raymcgovern.com. Thanks for reminding me to mention that, Joanne. I would have been kimchi with my son.
Well, I am so grateful for all of the whistleblowers that we have out now, like you and many others, because it's opened so many people's eyes to what's really going on. I mean, without that, we'd still be really in the dark. So I'm thankful for your voice.
Let me just mention in that connection that we have just nominated our 20th awardee,
Oh,
the Sam Adams Award for Integrity and Intelligence. His name is Daniel Hale.
awesome.
And if you look at what's going on with the drone stuff
Mhm.
and how it accounts for so much killing and so much hatred from the people in Afghanistan, you could see how richly deserved it was for us to give this kind of award to a fellow who spoke out fearlessly and is now facing 4 years in jail for telling the truth, warning the American people that this kind of unconscionable activity was going on. There's actually a piece in the Washington Post yesterday by another targeteer. He's a Marine captain, and he talked about sitting at his air-conditioned desk and killing people remotely, and they're going taking a hot shower and having a nice cuisine, and then getting up the next morning and doing the same thing. He says it with very little remorse. It was just like he was doing his job. He was just following orders. Was every much of.
But that's in great contrast to Daniel Hale, who didn't he read in court, like, I had to say something. This was my conscientious objection to what I was doing. But I think what's really scary now is that I've seen some stuff about AI drones that I guess that's the military solution to, we don't want anybody to feel bad about doing this remotely if you can't do it the way that guy you just mentioned does it. So we're just going to go with AI. Like, that's not horrifying. I don't know what is.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're right. I mean, right now we have a chance to at least appeal to the consciences of these. I've been down at Creek Air Force Base in Nevada with my friends that have closed down that road several times, and we have these signs trying to appeal to the conscience of these targeteers, these same people that sit in these air-conditioned offices and kill people. So at least we have that opportunity. There's a conscience involved with AI. Well, unless they program in some sort of conscience, it's not going to. So you're absolutely right, Kelley. This is even worse. So we need to find ways to appeal to the conscience of American people at large, and there's no better way than to give more print and air to what Daniel Hale himself said, and contrast it with this Marine captain who, he wasn't bragging. He was just saying, well, this is what I did. This is what I did. I said, blah, 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 blah. It's a very air conditioned, very comfortable. And not what I bargained for by becoming a Marine, but, I went to Annapolis and I got my commission, and I said, I'm going to go into Marines, and it turned out to be really easy duty. I mean, it's despicable that one person could have a conscience and be in prison. Another person and say, this is what I did. He's right. This is what I did. Kill a lot of people. And he's got op-ed in the Washington Post with little or no shame. What does that say about us American people?
Well, there's an excellent film, if anyone listening is interested in more about the drone strike and Daniel Hale, his story, and Lisa Ling, is on National Bird. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I have, and Sonia Kinnebeck she's a videographer that I met way back when she was doing one on Chelsea Manning and what Chelsea was facing back then. She's the best, and I'll tell you just a little vignette here. What I have come to understand in the last several months is that the collateral murder video, talk about underutilized. I haven't seen anybody use that in any respect, even in defense of Julian Assange, my good friend. By the way, I should explain my unkempt appearance here. 2.5 years ago, when Julian was thrown out of the embassy in London, the Ecuadorian embassy, he looked sort of unkempt and he looked pretty bad. And so I decided that there needed to be a way for me to identify myself with Julian, to express solidarity with him. And so this is 2.5 years worth, okay? And I hope that I'll be able to get rid of it soon, but it does remind me of Julian. And it's easy to forget your best friends, especially if there's a media blockout on them. So anytime I look in a mirror or pass through a window, I can't forget Julian. And when I have a chance at a forum like this to mention that, well, this is why we need to remember these people. And of course, Julian is, he was our Sam Adams awardee in 2010 when he came forward with the Afghan and with the Iraqi emails that were so damning. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing I'm a little bit more optimistic on the sentiment of American people. Still too passive, but we do know that, and it was confirmed by the fact that you can tell that Biden knows that most Americans wanted out of Afghanistan. So most people wanted out of that war. That is a lot of the reason why there's so much manipulation using the media, using social media, using censorship. But I think like, so the attempt to change that is either, through propaganda or also to block people who are telling the truth. I mean, that's widespread now. So we certainly have to work to tell people whatever we can find to be the truth. But the idea of a resistance is kind of what we need, I think. And I guess that's the big question as to how to do a peaceful resistance. People like you've been doing that for decades, Ray, and many others. I think we have, to a large extent, there are a lot of Americans who understand what's going on. We should, more than we give them credit for. They're also showing that we have longer memories than 6 months, as is the cliche way to talk about Americans. That just, change the subject, they'll forget about it in 6 months. Like, I'm not quite sure that that's as true as it used to be. So, yeah,
we're suffering. We're suffering in so many ways. I mean, the phrase like war, it's why we don't have nice things. I mean, we can't provide health care. We mentioned all the environmental stuff. We can't have clean water for Flint. I mean, people are waking up to it because it's affecting their daily lives here. I think too many are still in the dark about like the thread between all these wars. Like what's there are these common things that repeat. But yeah, of course they're gonna. That's the great unifier, being anti-war from the libertarians to the left. I mean, that's a unifier, and that's what they really don't want, right? So we have to silence people like Assange because they're going to tell the truth, and people will know what's really going on. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be more than just anti-war. It's got to be anti-telling the truth. It's got to be against these oppressive controls that are trying to keep people from telling the truth. I'm sorry. Got to be anti, like, don't believe everything they tell you. Come on. How many times are you going to take these lies?
Well, the ammunition that is at our disposal should be very potent. People say 1 trillion. Others, $2 trillion wasted on Afghanistan. This is not even including the human and the physical damage. So where are the smart people who can say, okay, let's say it was only 1 trillion. Now, what could we have done with $1 trillion here in the United States? Healthcare, infrastructure, education, what could we have done? All right, we'll apportion it out. Let's say we'll just go state by state. $1 trillion It's unimaginable, but it's a lot, right? Okay. So you divide it down. You say, we could have done this in New York. We could have done this in California. We could have done this in Nebraska or Iowa. People need something tangible, something discrete to realize the enormity of this scandal. And, the information is there. Craig Whitlock had that incredible article that the Washington Post, of all places, published at the end of 2019, showing how our military and civilian leadership deliberately lied about Afghanistan to the American people. It's there. It's in black and white. It's documentary. Okay. Now, that was sort of cast aside. Nobody gave it much publicity. But when you're looking at documents, and these documents came from U.S. government sources, you probably know about CIGAR, close but no cigar. Well, this is a different kind of cigar. It's a Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, set up by an act of Congress. He'd been working for, I think, about 15 years by act of Congress, reporting on all this stuff going on in Afghanistan. But it's been kept under wraps until somebody gave Craig Whitlock in 2019 a treasure trove of documents. And he put it together and said, these guys have been lying through their teeth ever since the beginning. Now, why can't we use that? Why can't we use that as well as the opportunity cost thing? I mean, I keep thinking Shakespeare-like, the fault may not be in our stars, but in ourselves. We're pretty smart people. Can we not figure out some sort of effective way to get this out to the American people so that they can see how thoroughly they've been deceived and deprived of the kind of funding that any honorable people should be aware of and able to devote to more sensible causes? That's our task. I've been trying for 20 years now. We've got to keep trying, and we have to not be discouraged. I like E.F. Stone, or I.F. Stone, saying, it's a tough business. I.F. Stone being the old newspaper guy. We're going to fail. And then we're going to fail. But then we're going to fail again. But then some fine day, people who think the way we do about justice are going to win. And our task in the interim is to keep it going and try to find some peace with it, even some enjoyment in it, in the knowledge that in the end, people like us care about justice are going to win. I believe that's the case. I may not live to see it. You guys probably will. I'll bet you $5.
I don't think we can do better than that, Ray. So we ought to let you go on that one. Thanks again so much. We really love talking with you.
You're most welcome.
Thank you, Ray. It's great to see you.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Ray McGovern. Follow Ray on Twitter @Ray McGovern and find his website, raymcgovern.com. This podcast is independent media, so listener support is really important. Patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire, Rockfin.com/AroundTheEmpire, PayPal.me/AroundTheEmpirePod. You can find the podcast on any mobile podcast app. Go to the website aroundtheempire.com for all the information that you'll need. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter @AroundTheEmpire. Join us on Telegram, and we'll see you next time. Take good care, everybody. Hang in there.